It's a question that everyone is asked. Does size really matter? When it comes to nugget ice, that is. The popularity of nugget ice has boomed over the last decade. Now with so many home machines that all make pretty much the same exact size and style of nugget ice. But many are buying their nugget ice from local fast food restaurants like Sonic and Chick-Fil-A. And these two restaurants make different size nugget ice from each other and from the one you're going to find at home. So does the size matter? Does it change your drink? And more importantly, the dilution when you use small nuggets versus large nuggets. We'll do a series of tests today, not worried about the temperature, but looking at dilution. We'll check the dilution when you use the same exact amount of ice by volume, using 1 cup. Then we'll do another test by weight. We'll also see if it really matters how long you blend something in a drink mixer. Is there a big difference between 5 and 10 seconds, 3 and 15 seconds? How about even longer than that? Does it matter? We'll also see if colder ice works better than warmer ice. And while some of you may have the idea that, of course, colder ice will make a drink colder and less diluted than warmer ice, you would not be correct in that seemingly logical assumption. About 15 years ago, Dave Arnold ran tests taking ice from a freezer versus ice that you would find in a bar well. This bar ice, as it will be called, is ice that's just sitting out in a well, and it quickly comes to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius very quickly. And common sense would conclude that ice at 32 degrees Fahrenheit would not chill a drink as well as ice that you pulled directly from a freezer, and my freezer is set at -10. But in his test, he found that that was not a factor. He even found that the warmer ice could actually chill a drink faster than the colder ice. There is one issue at hand though, and that's the surface water of the ice. To get bar ice to not contribute more to dilution, you need to remove as much of that surface water as possible. And he suggests adding it to a tin and then draining or flicking off the ice to get rid of the excess water. And while those results are to be trusted, I'm not so sure that it's true with nugget ice. In this post by Dave Arnold, he does address this with crushed ice and notes that getting rid of the surface water would work the same way it does on larger ice. But nugget ice is different than crushed ice because of how it's made. Nugget ice is usually made by freezing thin sheets of ice and then pressing them into cylinders. So nugget ice has a lot of air inside of it, and my guess is that if you left this out, like let's say in an ice bucket, you would not only have surface water, but you'd have melted ice or water inside the nuggets themselves. That's surface water that's essentially you can't remove. So we'll test that out as well. I have 4 styles of nugget ice today. My standard home nugget ice, which is this size. These are the machines you'll find on Amazon, Walmart, and Costco. Then the Sonic ice, which is considerably smaller. And then the Chick-Fil-A ice, which is substantially larger. The last ice we'll try is from this machine, the Ecozy 451B. This machine has a nice look and design to it. It's smaller than most machines as well, but what I found most interesting of all is that it makes smaller nuggets, much smaller and closer to Sonic than the other ones. To make sure we have a somewhat accurate representation of a real drink, a real cocktail, all the liquids will be measured to be exactly the same by weight. And then I'll be straining off each pour into a glass that is on a scale. So this will get as accurate as I can make it. The mix I'm using today is 15% alcohol, 4% sugar, and has green food coloring, which makes it easier to see. I was using this for some SLUSHi machine testing. We'll start with testing all 4 ice styles with 1 cup of ice, and that's by volume, with 4 ounces about of our mix. We'll start by weighing off our alcohol mix, which will be 120 grams. For the volume measurements, I'm just doing 1 cup, just kind of patting it down, make sure that there's nothing overflowing, and make sure that all the little crevices in there are filled. $147.2. Now the Chick-Fil-A ice. 148.5, so we're just 1 gram off there. Next up, the ice from Sonic. That has to dilute more. It's so much smaller. 150.2 grams. This is why I'm doing these tests, because the logical thing in your mind says, oh, that's going to be way more diluted because that ice is so much smaller. There's more ice in this cup than in the other ones, you would think, because it compacts more, but you don't really know. So that's pretty close. I do use this 1 cup measuring cup all the time. I like using plastic because then you don't have to worry about your ice sticking to metal if you use a metal scoop or a metal 1 cup scoop. You don't have to worry about frosting over. And even if you keep the metal in your freezer, like I see people do that, it still will have ice kind of stuck to the inside of it. So that's why I use this one, if you're wondering why I use plastic instead of metal scoops. And finally, the Ecozy 451B Nugget Ice. $148.3. All right, so all the numbers are up on the screen right now, and it doesn't look like there's really much of a difference at all when it comes to the size of the ice that you use. There's some differences between the two, but if you look at the numbers, the Chick-Fil-A, which is the biggest, was 148.5, and the Ecozy was 148.3, and that Ecozy is a lot smaller. The size of the Ecozy ice kind of reminds me of restaurants like Trader Vic. They're not really nuggets, they're more rectangles of ice instead of nuggets. So I think that kind of proves the point that if you're worried about, hey, my ice is a lot smaller than other ice, then when I use a drink mixer, it's not going to make a difference. Now, can it make a difference if you're pouring it into a glass with some of that ice, like the large ice versus small ice? I don't know. We're not testing that today. Just trying to see when you're using a drink mixer, what happens to dilution if you're using different sized ice. And so far, it seems like it's the same. But let's move on now. Do the same test again, but instead of using 1 cup, I'm going to actually weigh out the ice. In this round, I'll be using 120 grams of our mix and 110 grams of ice. $148.6 grams. Chick-Fil-A ice is just so much bigger than the rest of them. It's hard to wrap your head around the fact that these things are all equal when you're doing it this way. Chick-fil-A's 146.6, so 2 grams difference. Sonic's 152 grams, so we have about a 4 gram difference from the Sonic compared to the other ones, and actually almost 6 grams difference between that and the larger Chick-fil-A. $148.6. I don't know what to make of these conclusions, not yet. It seems like everything's pretty close. This is not an exact scientific experiment with a bunch of different variables that are all covered. I'm only doing this one time. If you redid this test again, you might have slightly different results. But in my mind, a couple gram difference between the style of ice is totally acceptable. It makes no difference when it comes to using the drink mixer, in my opinion. Now, as I was putting each one of these in the drink mixer, sometimes that might have taken me, a couple seconds to get to the machine. Maybe it was a couple seconds longer. I counted in my head for 5 seconds each time, but was it actually 5 seconds? So there's a ton of variables you can get into, but I think it pretty much proves a point. If you look at the numbers for either by 1 cup or by 110 grams of ice, you're gonna get something pretty consistent, whether you use the smallest nugget ice you can find or the biggest nugget ice you can find from Chick-fil-A. Next, let's see if it matters if the ice is coming straight from the freezer or if it's coming from this ice bucket, which has been sitting out now since I started shooting this video. It's probably been 20 to 30 minutes. And I trust Dave Arnold when he does these tests, but I always like to look at these things myself. I took my Thermopin and put it into my freezer, the one I've been using for the last 20, 30 minutes to get ice in and out of, into the big container of ice that I use. And it got down to -5 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so the ice coming from that freezer, which I have set to -10, is -5. And it's probably not a super accurate representation of the temperature. It's in ice with air and all that. But this one over here, which has been sitting out for just 20 minutes, is between 30 and 32 degrees Fahrenheit. There doesn't seem to be a lot of surface water on it, but we'll see if there's a big difference. And since I want to be as accurate as I can, I'm going to be doing this by weight instead of volume. 148.2 grams, just comparing it to the last round, that was 148.6 grams. So pretty exact. If you're going to measure out the weight of your ingredients, and then you're going to measure out the weight of your ice, you're going to get pretty consistent results across the board. So this ends up at 156.4 grams. And if you look back over all of our testing so far, that is the most dilution out of any of the other tests. So the ice size to me didn't matter too much, a couple grams difference. I'm fine with it. But when you get to be 8 grams difference, and when we're talking about grams of ice, that equals milliliters of water. So you can think of 8 grams as 8 milliliters of water, which is over 1/4 of an ounce. So is 1/4 of an ounce of extra water a big deal in a cocktail? It depends on the cocktail. If it's a zombie or something with 13 ingredients and a lot of pretty strong booze, I think that extra dilution is okay. If you're serving it on crushed ice that someone's going to drink over the course of 10, 20, 30 minutes where that ice is melting that whole time, I think it's okay. If it's something else that's a little more delicate that you want to control the dilution from, then, this isn't a scientific test and it hasn't been tested over and over and over again, but we can see from, rounds 1, 2, and 3, pulling ice from the freezer and then putting them in the drink mixer for the same amount of time pretty much yields the same result. But then when you go to the ice that's been sitting out now, that's about 25, 30 degrees warmer, that ice adds more dilution. But it's not necessarily a temperature thing. It's a water thing. But as I was pulling this out, there's no water to come off of it. The cubes are wet. There's obviously some surface water on them. Is there surface water inside of them? I have no idea, but they're definitely wetter, and I don't know how you can easily sort of flick off the ice that is on nugget ice. Now, some people like to store their ice in Lewis bags. Could you put a canvas Lewis bag and kind of wick off some of that water? You could, but for me at home, making a drink at home where I want to make the best version of a drink I can, I don't see why I would not, continually keep ice in the freezer. But everyone's situation is different. If you're at a bar, you can't necessarily do that. If you don't have the freezer space, you can't necessarily do that. But I think this does potentially prove that when it comes to nugget ice from your freezer will dilute your drink less than ice from a bucket. And for those of you out there who happen to just run your nugget ice machine 24/7 and are pulling ice from there, your ice is going to be as warm, if not maybe a little bit warmer than the ice I use today, which will contribute to more dilution, which you can decide if that's a negative or if you really just don't care. I am aware that not everyone has a drink mixer, and this test was not really all about the drink mixer, but it's easier to test things for me this way. So for all you shakers out there, later in the day that I made this video, I wanted to make a Mai Tai. So I thought I'd test out shaking freezer nugget ice versus bar nugget ice. The -5 to -10 degrees Fahrenheit ice and the 32 degrees Fahrenheit ice. I measured them out and made sure that the volume before adding ice was identical by weight. Turns out a Mai Tai is 118 grams before dilution. I then added in 110 grams of ice to each, shook them for about 10 seconds, and then strained them off. The freezer ice was 150.9 grams, while the bar ice was 163.4 grams. That's 13.5 grams difference. That's 13.5 milliliters. That's almost a full ½ ounce. And the difference in ABV is 24.8% versus 22.9%. And just to clarify, more dilution is not necessarily worse. A stronger drink is not necessarily better. And also very important here, the final amount of alcohol is the same in all of these drinks today. It's just the extra water we are looking at. So you're not getting served weaker drinks with bar ice or drinks with less alcohol, just drinks with more dilution. And that does not necessarily equal bad. All right, last but not least, we're going to test to see if it matters how long you do something in the drink mixer. A lot of times you'll read in books, it says, do for 3 to 5 seconds, do for 7 seconds and no more. Well, let's find out. And I'll do this in a little quicker fashion here. We'll test 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and 20 seconds. I'll weigh the ice each time. I'll weigh the drink and we'll see if it really makes a difference. And this is the ice that I use all the time, pulling it straight from the freezer. So there's a pretty big spread in the numbers there. There's 13 grams or 13 milliliters of water difference between doing for 3 seconds and doing it for 20 seconds. So there is a difference. It does contribute to the dilution. But let's compare 20 seconds with ice from the freezer to doing just 5 seconds using the ice from the ice bucket. And the ice bucket still contributed more dilution than it did at 20 seconds in the drink mixer. Now for fun and to do one last thing, let's take ice from the ice bucket and weigh out the same exact amount of mix and the same amount of ice and do it for 20 seconds and see what that comes out to. So that came out to 167.1 grams, which means it is 12 milliliters more. 12 milliliters more, that's like 0.4 ounces, not quite half an ounce more than doing 20 seconds using ice straight from the freezer. And what's kind of interesting about this and something that I wasn't sure when we started what the takeaway would be here, but I think there's 2 important things here. First of all, let's talk about the style of ice. I would have thought that maybe the style of ice, the size of ice you use would make a bigger difference than it does. To me, it doesn't really make a difference. Doesn't matter if you're using Chick-Fil-A, Sonic, the Ecozy machine, or you're using the types of machines that I've been using in the past, the ones you find on Amazon. Now, for full disclosure, this machine was sent to me for free. I didn't even know it was coming. I thought that they were sending me a SLUSHi machine until this showed up. Once I tested it out and saw it made smaller ice, I thought this would be a great time to test this. Then when I went and got Sonic Ice, I totally forgot how much smaller Sonic Ice is than everything else. If you are interested in this machine, I will leave links in this episode's description. I've used it a handful of times now, and I like the style of ice it makes. I like having the ability to make smaller ice. The only 2 negatives I found are very specific to me, and most people wouldn't care. But first is that the drain line is under the machine. I like to keep mine empty, drained, and dry when not in use. But this also makes sense since it's a smaller machine, and it's typical for these machines. Second is that you can't plumb a direct water line to it. Not to be expected in a smaller countertop machine, but I would prefer to plumb a water line to it. All in all, I like it, and I like that it looks good, especially if you have one sitting out on your counter all the time. So the size of your ice cube doesn't appear to really matter that much in a drink mixer. However, the amount of time you blend does make a difference. But it's not as uniform and easy to figure out because it also makes a difference what temperature your ice is, whether you're pulling ice directly from a freezer. In my case, that's about -10 to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, or you're pulling ice, bar ice, from a well, from an ice bucket, or even directly from your nugget ice machine, you're going to get different results. So when a book or a recipe says to flash blend something for 5 seconds to 7 seconds, or if someone tells you no more than 3 seconds, that doesn't really matter to you unless you know that you're using the same style of ice as them. Now, I'm not going to change anything I do. I'm not going to get too specific, but if there was a bar that was using bar ice and they said to blend it for 5 seconds and no more, then I know I can actually use my ice and go up to 20 seconds, and I'm going to get the same diluted drink. So for me, I think the constructive thing in how I create cocktails at home is that I can blend for a lot longer than I thought I could because of the temperature of my ice. Now, like I've already said here a few times, not a scientific experiment. You can poke holes in everything I've done so far. I've only tested it this one time. If you have the ability to do this, I encourage you to do this. I'm happy to have any of this information sort of proven wrong, or someone else come forward with different information that might help clarify these things. But since I have all these styles of ice, and I have a drink mixer, and I have a Sonic and a Chick-Fil-A not too far away, I thought it'd be a fun experiment, and I learned more here than I thought I was before we started. So there you go, that's it for this one. Does size matter? Well, size doesn't matter. Does temperature matter? Yes, it seems like it does. So my big takeaway here is that I could just blend the hell out of anything in the drink mixer, and it really doesn't matter if the person telling me to blend for a short amount of time is using ice that is a little bit warmer. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like below. Consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to support this channel more so I can buy more kinds of nugget ice, then check out my Patreon page. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.